Good morning, everybody. This is Scott Carson from MedTech Marketplace. Excited today to have a gentleman on that was introduced to me just a short time ago by a plastic surgeon. She referred me to him to talk to him about how we could assist in getting some equipment and possibly some med surg and pharma into her facility over time. And Eric Wilson and I had a chance to visit a little bit and realize that some great synergies and what Powered by MRP is doing, and also what he's doing. So Eric Wilson, welcome to MedTech Marketplace.
Hey, good to be here, Scott. How are you, man?
All is good, man. I love the backdrop. Really what you're known as is kind of Eric Wilson Coaching, and there's some interesting history there. I think I'd love for you to reshare with the group who's watching and listening what you shared with me a week or so ago about your background, because I think it's incredibly unusual.
Yeah. So Eric Wilson Coaching is kind of a double play on words. It's I spent my first 10 years as a professional out of college as a college football coach. I played at a small school. I was more, I don't say played, I was, more of a backup than anything, but I was, had a passion for the game of football. I played for Brian Kelly, and then he gave me my first coaching job. And then I ended up going down to the University of South Carolina for 4 years, and I was up at Murray State for 2 years. So that's what I thought I was going to do for my whole life, was coach college football. A series of events kind of back, this was, 20 years ago, when the money is not what it is now. If the money was what it is now, I might still be coaching college football, but it wasn't. I was making $26,000 a year working, 100 hours a week. And so at a certain point, as I started thinking about a family, I kind of decided to pivot in terms of my career path. The skill that I had developed that I thought was transferable was a sales skill. When you're in college coaching, you're recruiting and you're building relationships with these kids from their sophomore year on, and you learn how to sell relationally just as part of the job. And so I had some contacts. I pivoted into pharma. I was in pharma for 6 or 7 years, and I went from sales to sales training to sales management training. And then at the same time, my wife was working for Allergan in their consulting division. And long story short, we ended up buying a medical spa that was not doing very well in South Carolina. We took a $300,000 medical spa and made it a $2 million medical spa in about 18 months. And then we took that and we started a practice management company. We partnered with a plastic surgery group up in Charlotte, and we started a surgery center. And we did that for another 15 years. And my consulting business just kind of organically grew out of that. So yeah, the idea of, hey, you were a college football coach for 10 years. How did you end up where you are? That's kind of the backstory on it.
I'm just curious, is, coaching as long as you have, and looking how coaching's evolved, and some of the, football, especially college football, is back when you were doing it, was kind of like Formula One is today in the U.S. Where it's, it was just kind of the just starting. And I'm sure you've got some interesting stories. I'd love to hear maybe one or two that when people ask about, jump out, and
Sure.
That no one would ever know unless they were watching this.
Well, I stayed involved in the game, Scott. I stopped coaching for probably 6 or 7 years. And then just as luck would have it, when I moved into Columbia, I ran across, I actually coached when I was at South Carolina for a guy named Brad Scott. And his son at the time was in 8th grade. Well, that guy is now the head coach at University of South Florida. But I ran into him as a 22-year-old kid who was at a local high school, was about to get a head coaching job at a brand new high school. And he's like, hey, is there any way I could talk you to help me on the side, outside of your work? And so he kind of got me back into it just because I love it. And I've been doing it ever since on the side. So I'm an offensive coordinator at a high school, but probably, a couple of the stories that I think are the most interesting is at a certain point, I had over 20 kids that I had coached, mostly at South Carolina, that were in the NFL. Deuce Staley, who was the interim head coach and has been a longtime guy up with the Philadelphia Eagles. I think now he's with the Lions. was a running back for us. So it just was kind of fun because we were in the SEC. I was at South Carolina the year that they actually left the ACC and went into the SEC. So I've played at just about every big stadium in the South. And probably the funniest thing that I ever heard was I grew up in Michigan. And when I came down to South Carolina, I was at this booster function, probably the first week I was there. And a guy walked up to me, introduced himself to me. He said, "Where are you from?" I told him. And he's like, "Well, the first thing you need to learn, son, about the South is that Sunday, football is a religion and Sunday is a holy day." So that was kind of my introduction to how football's looked at down here. And even though South Carolina has kind of been up and down, forever, they put 90,000 people in that stadium every week. It's insane what it's like down here.
We have an employee that's a young woman from Georgia, and I think it's in her veins, man.
It is born, and I would consider myself, like, I've been here 30 years now, but my kids were born here, and my son's like that. Even though he's from South Carolina, he is a Georgia guy through and through, like, just bleeds it. So they all pick a team by the time they're 5 or 6, and that's it for the rest of their life.
Kind of just transitioning from that kind of, almost like you have two lives, at this point. You've got this great kind of coaching life that you continue to teach young children, young men, and soon I imagine young women. In
I've actually got two girls on our team.
Nothing makes me happier as a father of 2 boys and 2 girls. We've really coached our children that opportunities are endless and barriers don't exist, and that's great to hear.
Agreed.
I don't think, and I don't, I was not a great football player, but I was a 3-sport athlete in high school, and I had an opportunity to play backup quarterback my junior and senior year. And I'm not a big guy, but I was a smart guy, and in a wing T offense back then, which was a long, long time ago. You didn't have to be big. You just had to get to the outside.
There's people still running that, Scott. We actually scrimmaged the team yesterday running the wing T.
Well, little guys can get to the outside. And
That's right. You got to be
fast, but I wasn't slow. And but I'll tell you what, football, especially with coaches like you, and I had a coach like that, a gentleman named Bill Mack, and Bill taught me grit. And probably if I look at the top 10 lessons in my life that I've learned, that I've carried with me, is just that kind of foundational, grit and grind that you really learn playing football, and how to get back up when you really don't want to. And I really applaud you for continuing to train young children, young men, young women on a game that was so important to me and so important to so many other people.
Well, I agree with you completely. It's like I said, I was a good high school football player. I was not a great college football player. I was, like I said, watching more than I was playing. But it instilled not just a love of the sport for me. Exactly like you said, I learned how to overcome adversity by being coached really hard by men that I really respected. Showed me that I could push past boundaries that I thought I had, that I could do things that I could never imagine I could do. And those lessons that I learned have helped me as an entrepreneur with multiple businesses that we've bought and sold, have helped me transition how to teach those kind of same skills, not just to my athletes, but to the clients that I work with, because starting a business is not easy. It does require a lot of tenacity, a lot of ability to, push through things that are uncomfortable, and to take on things that you may not have even thought you could take on. So it's something that for a lifetime for me has made an impact on the way that I live and the way that I run my business.
I agree with you. I think that, physicians, clinicians, administrators of clinics don't understand they're running an operating business. And what I mean by that is, what it means, but I'm going to clarify for out there that, there's lots of businesses out there, but when you have people and customers and infrastructure and marketing and branding and PR and customer service and technology and all of those things. That is an operating business, and it is virtually impossible to be successful. I mean, the things are really stacked against you. And I don't believe people understand that mapping out a business on a napkin or a business plan or sticky notes or whatever your mechanism is to take your idea to reality is that first step into turning on the switch of an operating company is incredibly difficult. And then to maintain the momentum through the challenges, and they're every day and they never stop. And the bigger you get, the more there are. And it's incredibly challenging. And this is a great way, I think, to transition from your coaching experience into the coaching experience of businesses. And you and I have, when we spoke, kind of foundational beliefs and KPIs and understanding. You mentioned something really great to me, which is sales and revenue doesn't equal profit, and how physicians, clinicians, administrators get in trouble, and how leadership within or physicians need to pivot from being a physician to a CEO, COO of running their business and what that means. And I'd love for you to kind of expand on that for the group and the listeners and watchers to kind of understand what you see is where clinicians and administrators are making kind of the critical 5 or 10, big mistakes or issues or things they're currently not seeing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the thing that I just from a 30,000-foot view that I see almost all the time is that clinicians get almost zero business training. So they come into their own business looking at it as a physician and not as a CEO or a business owner. They're tend to be very tunnel visioned, and it's all kind of what's in front of me, and what am I used to being in front of me, instead of understanding that in a business, I like to use the word silos or verticals, but there's fundamental pieces of that business that all have to be put in place properly. They all have to be monitored, they all have to be coached, and they all have to be evaluated. And too frequently what I see is that a physician goes and they start a practice on a skeleton because they're starting with very little money. They might have one person working the front desk who kind of becomes a jack of all trades. There's probably a clinical person, and then if they've got an OR, that's a different thing, but most of them are starting with 2 or 3 people, and everyone does a little bit of everything. And so the problem is, as they get bigger, they don't recognize, okay, there's a marketing component to my business. There's an operational component to my business that has to do with customer service. There's the surgical part of my business. Okay, there's the retail part of my business. And each one of those things needs to be staffed and looked at in a way that allows them to not just measure things, but also to excel and become profitable. And usually what happens is it just gets gummed up, right? In the beginning, you can have 2 or 3 people with their hands in the pie because you're not very busy. And so you get away with inefficiencies. Mm-hmm. But as they grow and really become busier, those inefficiencies really start to show themselves. And what it turns into is a practice that feels very, very uncomfortable. You've got patients with long wait times who then become discouraged. Your staff feels frazzled because they don't have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. They're all just trying to do everything. And you get a very dysfunctional business that doesn't have a leader. And I think that's one of the other biggest challenges is when I work with physicians, they think of themselves as a physician with a practice. They don't consider themselves, or they don't think about themselves as a leader. And very frequently they get caught up in situations where, they're leaning on their staff for emotional support. They're discussing things with one employee about another employee, and they don't recognize the importance of how to lead a group of people towards a common goal because they've never been taught those things. And so, when I work with somebody and I coach somebody, I'm helping them set up all the fundamental business principles that are important, but I'm also coaching them on how do you handle each situation that comes up? How do you handle this employee who's not doing what they're supposed to be differently versus this other employee who's disappointed because they're not growing as fast in the company as they want to, and not handling those things all the same way, and really understanding how to lead people versus just kind of how to have a business and put your head down and see patients all day long.
It's you reminded me of something that that I kind of wanted to share with the group is, from my own experience, and that relates to this is, I've read at least over 100 business and strategy books where physicians have read over, and clinicians and administrators have probably read hundreds of books or over 100 books as it relates to the specialty that they're focused on, and
Right.
and endless amounts of time and research. And I still feel like I know very little as it relates to running an operating company. And it's taken me a lifetime of business, it seems, to get to a point where we're having some level of success. And it's through those, I used to call them failures, but it's now lessons. Those lessons are pretty valuable. And I think one of the things, and I'll try to make an example, is for a physician or a clinician, it may be hard for them to understand the difference between a bad employee and a mediocrity, an average employee. And what I found is the bad employees are easy to find, and you can get those kind of managed out of the business. It's the ones that are average that actually create the most damage, and it's hard to see them because they have a tendency to blend into the group. And it's only through kind of KPIs and management and coaching and process and SOPs that you can identify those underperformers and either coach them up or coach them out. And how do you feel about that? And is that some of the things that you and your team do when you're working with a physician, clinician?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think one of the first things that I talk with physicians about in terms of leadership and making sure that their organization functions properly from the standpoint of their people is one of the biggest things that I tend to see in small practices is for lack of a better word, they can be very gossipy. And basically that can mean a lot of things, right? That can mean a staff member who, brings their personal problems into the office and uses other employees as their earpiece or to kind of, work through things that bother them. And then they start to take up a lot of bandwidth within the office. You've also got employees who aren't happy with either the manager or not happy with a decision the doctor made. And they decide that they're going to, vet those out with other employees and create dissension. And it takes not a lot of skill, but it takes a lot of fortitude to make the decision as a business owner and a leader that you're not going to allow that to happen in your culture. But unfortunately, in most practices, it is allowed to happen because the doctor is really so focused on seeing patients that they're not really paying attention to building the culture. And they really they kind of get this attitude of, I just don't want to know about it. Just deal with it yourself. And so then you end up getting a staff that kind of runs things themselves, and the doctor only cares about, is the patient getting roomed on time and am I on time to the OR? And you end up with a dysfunctional practice where you've got high staff turnover. You've got staff members who are more interested in their own satisfaction than that of the patients. And you don't have a very good practice in terms of just enjoying being in it. But also what I always tell my clients is, listen, if you're doing things right, at the end of the day, it's always about the patient. Like every decision that you make when you have a conversation with your staff, or when you're trying to decide what the next step is to do with a staff member who, didn't do this or didn't do that, the first question you should ask yourself is what I'm about to do going to benefit my patient? Because that's what we're trying to do, is deliver an amazing patient experience. And if your staff is focused on themselves, they can't do that. So you really have to do a great job from a leadership perspective of leading your staff so that they understand, well, hey, when you walk in the door every day, everything we do is about the way we deliver care and the experience we deliver to our patients.
I have a couple things to comment on there. First, I couldn't agree with you more. The only things that really matter in the end are two, and often I'm challenged on my theory or my belief when I say this, but I fundamentally believe it's true. You can see in just about every business book, it says make sure your employees are happy, because you're not going to have happy customers if you don't have happy employees. And I fundamentally don't believe that's the focus. The focus is customer experience and making money. Those are the two things that matter, because making money is great anesthetic. It'll clean up a lot of messes. And customer experience is all really that matters, as you just pointed out. And what we've learned in the tech community in Utah, really in the tech community around the world, is you can have really happy employees because you have foosball and you have climbing walls and Pepsi coming and free lunches, but customer experience isn't connected to that. These tech companies continue to underdeliver on the things they're selling, but their employees are thrilled because they have unlimited PTO and they work remote, but that doesn't translate. And the reason they're doing well is because they've got venture funding that nonsense. So the focus must be customer experience and must be making money. And I don't believe you can achieve those things without having happy employees. And it sounded like you said the same thing. And then I want to circle back after you comment on that on another point.
Well, I would just say, I completely agree with you, but I think from the standpoint of those two things are congruent, right? At least most of my clients are in the elective cash pay space. So they're cosmetic plastic surgeons. They're not getting a lot of their patients from referrals or because they're taking call at the hospital. These people are coming to them, choosing to come to them, and they're evaluating their experience in that office against 2 or 3 other doctors that they're going to choose. And in my opinion, if you're doing things right for the patient and you're delivering an amazing patient experience, that directly correlates to making money. Because when you got a patient who's going to pay $15,000 or $20,000 for an aesthetic procedure, I always tell my clients that patient, before they ever walk in your office, has decided that you're a good doctor. If they didn't think that, they wouldn't be spending an hour to 2 hours with you. The two decisions that they're going to make, one, they know they're going to make it, and the other one is intuitive. The first one is, as a physician, can you deliver the outcome I want? Okay, that's what they want to know when they meet with you. But the intuitive one is, how do I feel in this office? I can't tell you how many times, whether it was in our own practices or in my other clients' practices, I've heard patients say, I came here because it felt different. They didn't have this big way to explain it. It was just, there's certain things that I teach staff members about how to engage people, but they basically felt like every time I was in this office and every interaction I had with somebody, I felt like that person legitimately cared about me as a person and cared about the experience I had in this office. That's the intuitive piece, and that's what makes you money in a cash-based practice. If you're not doing that, those patients are going somewhere else.
I want to make a point about that, and I still want to circle back to gossiping and negativity in the practice. I think this is such a great topic to touch on, and you and I probably have similar views. But I'll just share a story with you. I'm on the hunt for a new kind of general physician. My physician over the last 10 years is retiring, so I'm out looking for, as I continue to age, make sure I continue to stay healthy. And so I've been introduced to a couple of physicians, and I'm actually in the process of interviewing them. This is somebody I'm probably going to spend the next 10 to 15 years of my life or longer, I hope so, giving me care. And I reached out to one, and I got a call back, and I've been busy and haven't had a chance to call. And I called, and the person, I said, I'm calling for Paige. And the person answered the phone, said, well, Paige is busy. And I said, well, great. And I said, well, can I leave my name and number? My name is Scott Carson. And can you have him call me back? And I heard her say to Paige, this person answering the phone, hey, Paige, it's Scott Carson. I heard her say, well, I don't know who Scott is. And I was like, wrong place for me.
I'm gone.
Yep. I'm gone. And that's all it took. Now I get an email, I get a call saying, oh, Scott, I do know you're, I'm not calling him back. It just, if that's the way they talk amongst themselves about their customers, this is not the place I want to be. And I don't think those little tiny things, people don't understand how much that matters to the experience that customers are looking for, patients are looking for.
No, I completely agree. I mean, we talk a lot about, like you just said, the little things. How do you engage a patient when they walk in the door? Do you wait for them to come up to you, or do you immediately speak to them in a way that brings them in and welcomes them and makes them feel like you want to engage with them? Same thing when they move to the back of the house. Even if you walk by somebody, right? I mean, one of the biggest, and it's a tiny trick,
Mm.
but it works so well that I tell my clients is teach your staff that anytime they cross paths with a patient, ask them a question. That's how you engage with somebody in a way that makes that person feel
Love
like
that.
you care about them. And it can be
Love
as easy as, what kind of day, how are you doing today? Is there anything that I can get for you? Can I help you find something? But anytime you ask a question of somebody, right, you're taking away anything they have to do to create engagement. And you're saying to them, I care about what's happening with you right now. How can I assist you? And if your staff actually functions with your patients with what I call a servant attitude, which is basically, hey, well, the entire reason we're here is to serve you. I promise your patients are going to have an experience in your office that's dramatically different than most practices they walk into.
Operating companies, going back to the first thing we were touching on, operating companies solely exist to serve.
Correct.
Solely exist to serve. It's not to serve the leaders or the owners. This is where most companies fail. It is a service, it is a service business, but it is no different than any other. We are here to serve. If I don't love serving people and caring for customers, you will most likely fail. And I fundamentally believe that. Now, most people argue with me, but I find that foundational in successful businesses.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think too, what I've seen happen since I've been in this business through a couple different economic cycles is doctors get lulled into a false sense of security through a strong economy, right? COVID really juiced the aesthetic business the last 24 months. Literally, people didn't see any summer seasonality until this past year for the last 2.5 years. But I saw this happen during the downturn when the housing boom too. Practices who either started or got really, really busy doing cosmetics and were living off the fat of the land. All of a sudden, when the economy started to tighten, those things started to matter because now you're fighting for a smaller piece of a pie that's existing. And if you're not delivering on those kind of things, those patients are going somewhere else. And now all of a sudden, I've seen practices constrict to the point where the doctor's like, oh, I got to start doing insurance work again because my cosmetic business isn't strong enough. And I've grown practices through two different economic cycles where I just watched other people around us contract and we got bigger, but it was all based around that servant attitude and the ability to deliver an unparalleled patient experience.
I absolutely love that. I want to go back to negativity and gossiping in the practice. What I'm about to share, and I'm embellishing a little bit because I wasn't really prepared to talk about this, and so I don't have the exact statistics or the data in front of me, but this has been studied repeatedly at some of the best institutions such as Harvard and other places, and I know you know this, is that when someone like you or me or a leader in an organization speaks or writes positively, you increase the chances of success to that statement or written statement by 7 times. So if I say we're going to create a great customer experience, you increase the success of that by 7 times. However, if you conversely say this is going to be bad, you actually increase it by 3 to a function of 10. And what I've seen with clinicians is because they don't understand the magnitude of this, is they're constantly talking about negativity things. They're actually spawning the behavior that they don't want. And so they're out there talking about patients being late and things not being done. And the things they don't want are the things they're actually creating. And what leaders have to understand is that nothing's perfect. We talked about this. It's hard running an operating company. And there was a great lesson I learned years ago, which is, and it took me almost a decade or two to figure out what it meant. But there was this business leader when I was in my 20s that I really admired. And a friend of mine said, you know, what makes him great is his head could be on fire, literally on fire, and you would not know it. And I never really understood what that meant, which is when he's got stuff going on, crisis, problems, issues, he doesn't share that. He is under control. He's containing that. and he's continuing to lead his team through that adversity. And what great leaders realize is, and this is where I think clinicians are lacking, is problems are opportunity. You should be thanking that you've got a problem that is front and center that you can address. So if there's anything that I think I'm hearing you say, is what you're really trying to do is coach them into staying positive, focus on solutions, look at problems as opportunities. Can you expand on there? Do you agree? But you kind of touched on that a little bit.
No, yes, I agree. So just to give you a good example, this is recently something that happened with one of my clients. We had a staff member in a very important position who came with extensive experience. We were lucky to get her. And she, within the first week that she was there, was in a room with two other employees. And the doctor came in, was kind of very upset about something that happened. Instead of pulling one employee off separately and having a conversation with them, kind of came in and chewed the whole room out. And this person left after 2 weeks, because there was two different experiences like that. And, I found out about it after the fact, and then, there's been significant improvement, but what happened there should have been handled completely different. But I see that happen all the time, where a physician's frustrations are dealt with as a group, and they just kind of let loose on their staff. And so the message that they're sending, just like you said, is, hey, when you're upset about something, this is how you deal with it. You get into a group of people and you light the person up that you're upset with, or if you're not sure whose fault it is, you light everybody up. Right.
Mhm.
And so how can you expect your staff to conduct themselves differently if you don't conduct yourself that way? And so you have to, and this is one of the things that I see more. I can't tell you how much I see this. The physicians conduct themselves in one way, but then they expect their staff to conduct themselves in a much more professional way than they actually behave, which is completely counterintuitive, but they don't even recognize that they're doing it. And so that's one of the first things I always have to do with a client, is to say, look, whatever you expect from your staff, you have to model in the way that you behave and the way that you act. You can't expect professionalism from your staff when you don't do that, because the reality of it is, and you and I both know this, in a lot of medical practices, the physician's been through, 15 years of school, but most of your employees are not college graduates, unless they're, a BSN or they're a PA. Most of your MAs, the people working your front desk, they've got high school diplomas, right? So they have not ever been in a Fortune 500 company and taught how to be a professional. They usually conduct themselves very much the way they conducted themselves when they were in high school, right? They kind of flesh their problems out in a group. No one's ever modeled that for them. So if, as a physician, if you don't teach your people, this is the expectation in terms of what I call professionalism in this office, and then model it, you're going to get what what you model yourself. And that's most of the time what we see is a lot of dysfunction, because that starts at the top.
This conversation is really interesting, and I want to comment on a couple things, and then kind of focus on maybe the 5 or 10 things that clinicians could do that could really help them, and then be successful that maybe they're not thinking. It's always helpful, I think, if after watching something like this or listening to it, is okay, I get it, Eric and Scott, we need to make some changes, but what are the 1 or 2, 3 things I could do? But one thing I want to just share, going to your point about clinician, which is a function of leadership, is several years ago, and when we met, I may have shared this with you. I think I did, but is a clinician came to me and said, I've got really a horrible culture. I don't know what's going on with it. And they were going away for the holidays. And he said, would you mind talking to my staff when I'm gone? And I started interviewing. I said, would I be happy to? And I started interviewing the staff. And I found out that this clinician was doing some things that were really unethical. And the patients were watching it. And I think it was so obvious to me that they're only going to behave as good as you're behaving. And if you're not even behaving well or even good, and you're behaving badly and doing really bad things, you've set the bar so low that they're never going to be better than you. Okay. So it was surprising. I'm like, what do you expect? I mean, if you're behaving this, when I actually sat down and spoke to him, I said, do you really expect they're going to listen to you or respond to you or follow up on what you say? And it was remarkable that there was no connection there, that they didn't make that connection. I'm sure you see the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that just comes from, through most physicians training, they're always in a hospital setting most of the time. And in those hospital settings, there are managers at every staff level, right, that take care of those things. But then when you go out and you set up your own practice, you don't have that. You're the one who's taking care of it, right? And then very frequently, people get hired in management positions that really aren't qualified to be a manager. And if they're not, then they're not helping bring the culture along either. So, and I don't want it to come across as I'm coming down on physicians, because the reality of it is they don't get trained in any of this. Like there's no classes in med school about leadership. Most of them are not taking any kind of business minor. They're in everything that they've taken has been medical along the way. And so all of a sudden it's like, okay, you're out, you're good to go start your practice. And everything is done on intuition and how you've, done things in the past. So they're not equipped to do those things. So it's human nature to kind of focus on the things that are happening that you don't like. It's not human nature to step back from it and say, okay, how does everything I do impact everyone around me? And how do I create a culture that puts patient first? And how do I model that so that everyone acts like those are, high level leadership traits and skills that they're not taught. So, I mean, that's why, I have a business, is because I can help them not just operationally, learn how to put things in place, but learn how to lead their team so that they actually deliver an amazing experience for their patients. And quite honestly, they end up a lot more happy because they've got a really functional group of people that enjoy what they do, and they end up with good people in there, and it makes running their practice a lot more fun.
No question. We probably should clarify that is at the beginning of this, and I was talking about how hard it is to run an operating company. This is universal and not limited to clinicians, physicians, and administrators. Let's just use it as an example. You're a programmer, an architect, a designer of Unix or other type of coding, and you come out of basically a bachelor's program, a master's program. You go to work for Google. You work in this environment, or you work for some tech company, and all of a sudden you have this amazing idea, no different than a clinician or physician coming to market, and you want to go take it to market. You're given capital. People are telling you you're brilliant, but none of these guys, men and women, have any business acumen at that point. They're just being thrown into it, and they're facing the same thing. Everything we're talking about is universal, and none of the physicians, clinicians, and administrators that we're referencing are alone. So I agree with you. I'm not picking on any physicians. We're really talking about is a business discussion here.
Well, I was just going to say that, I feel I wish I had the opportunity to help more. I was lucky enough before I got into this business in my transition that I spent time in, multiple Fortune 500 companies and went through extensive management training. And so, I didn't just intuitively learn the stuff. I was taught, in trainings that, hey, I was told, this 2-week session that you're spending is costing, us $75,000 per person, right? That's the kind of resources that these bigger companies pour into their people. And those are the things that I learned just because I was lucky enough to work for those kind of companies. And now, physicians are trying to intuitively figure all this out. So, I mean, that's why I do what I do. Is I love making people money, and I do. Like, every one of my clients makes a lot of money, and I can cut their learning curve down on a new practice from, what would normally take 7 to 10 years. I can get them there in usually 18 to 24 months.
Love
that. The big thing that I love is watching them make money, but at the same time build a practice that they really, really love to be in and enjoy coming to every day.
You touched on that you've seen some slowdown over the last 24 months. It's been just absolute, it's craziness. I would agree with you. The aesthetic market has exploded like never before. And I generally feel that this is universal, not in aesthetics, that you could be a very bad entrepreneur, a very bad business owner, and still be successful because there is just so much capital with individuals, patients, equities. There's just money everywhere. And so, as I said earlier, money is a great anesthetic to mistakes. We're getting ready to head into some really difficult times. There are cycles, whether we're in one or out of one, I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows, but it sure seems like there's some pressure coming, or we're in it and we can't see it. But I know it's coming. You and I both know it's coming. And that means you've got to batten down the hatches. You got to start getting efficient. You got to start getting ready. You have to, holding on to cash, stop spending the way you've been spending. So this is a great transition to that question I was going to ask is, what are maybe the top 3 things as kind of we wrap up here that you think a clinician could do like today to start to take this discussion they've listened to how do they kind of get going? What would be, if you were talking to me for the first time and I'd shared with you some of the struggles that I have, what would be the like almost universal 3 things somebody could do today?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I would say, and this is what I rarely see when I start working with a client, is you have to start measuring things that determine your success or failure. Almost no practice that I walk into has any process for measuring what we call KPIs, or key performance indicators. I might ask them, hey, what was your profit last quarter? They don't know. What was your profit year over year? They don't know. What percentage of leads are you turning into consultations? They don't know. What percentage of people that come into your office are actually booking surgeries or booking something else? They don't know. So there's no measurement of anything. You can't improve something that you don't know is failing. And so when I talk about measurement, there's a lot of different pieces of that component. But the biggest thing, as I kind of break that down, is to say, hey, there are certain parts of your practice that determine the success or failure of it. It's not one thing. And so you have to know what those verticals, right, or what those silos are. One of them is lead management. One of them is what happens when the patient gets into the office. One of them is, what are we doing to follow up with a patient after they come out of the office? Another one is revenue cycle management, inventory management, right? There's all these pieces to your practice. Every one of them should have a measurable or a key performance indicator that you're looking at on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis, so that when that starts to go, you can fix it, right? So what I see very frequently is a doctor will say to me, hey, my business is down, or, I can't get enough leads in here, or I've got tons of leads. How come I'm not making more money? and they look at it as a big picture, like one big pie. And the first thing that I have to teach them is, okay, there's 6 pieces to this, just this one silo within your practice that you've got to be measuring every one of those. Because if you say to me, hey, I'm not making as much money in the last quarter as I did the same quarter last year, then the first thing you need to be going back to is, okay, let's look at these key performance indicators and see which step of this funnel are we off. So that would be number one, is you have to know what to measure in your office, and you have to have a process in place to be measuring it. The second one.
What I tell my team is, you cannot expect what you don't inspect. You've heard that many times. You can't expect what you don't inspect. You've got to drill down and find the data and report on that data. Otherwise, you're going to get a random result. Keep going. Number 2.
Yeah. And I would just, to kind of play off of that, the normal thing that most physicians look at is leads, right? How many new leads are coming in? Well, I had, a year ago, I only had 70 leads a month. Now I've got 130. Like, I've almost got double the leads. Why am I not making double the money? And that comes down to your entire sales funnel, right? Okay, how many of those leads became consults? Like, you could be losing them there. Okay, how many of those consults actually showed up? You could be losing them there. Of the ones that showed up, how many actually booked? You could be losing them there. So that's just an example of a key performance indicator funnel that has to do with sales. So that's number 1. Number 2 is your people. And when I put that together, I put that together with culture, right? So it's a big piece of the conversation we had before. Have you established a culture in your practice that is a patient-centric culture? And you kind of hear that word thrown around a lot, but we hit on it pretty heavily. And to me, it's very, very serious. Is if you've got people in the lunchroom complaining about something that you're asking them to do, or complaining about what their colleague did that upset them, they're not thinking about your patients. They're thinking about themselves. So as a leader, you have to be patient centric, and you have to make sure that you're delivering an unparalleled patient experience, so that those patients, when they come into your office and compare you, to 2 or 3 other people they see, that they look at your office and just say, that felt different. And that's why I went there.
Number 3.
And then, yeah,
three.
number three, which we kind of hit on, is really, really take the time and effort to learn leadership skills and to understand how to lead a group of people. To me, those 3 things are the biggest things in a practice. Measure, know what you should measure and measure it. Make sure that everything you do is focused around your patient. Every question you ask yourself when you're going to make a decision, every potential move you're going to make as a practice, you should ask yourself, is this going to benefit my patient? That should be the very first question you ask yourself. And then number 3 is learn how to lead people.
You just
I had to
said
pick 3.
You just said basically some of the most important, or maybe the most important things in business. And, it's not often that I do a podcast and I feel like I, lead, because I'm really there to interview people and talk about what they're doing as it relates to the industry. But Eric, you've actually given me something to really focus on, because I think it applies to me, which is, into my team, is continue to focus on measurement. Second thing is culture, people, patient experience, or in my case, customer experience. And the third thing, which really was kind of riveting listening to you say this, is continuing to be a learner. What's interesting is clinicians and physicians are learners. They just have to pivot from learning
By nature
to learning something else. And a learner's mind is critical in business, because the market is moving. Fascinating discussion. There's dozens of other questions that I could ask, and we'll maybe pick that up on number 2 when we do it down the road. But Eric, great hour. I appreciate the time very much. I've learned a lot. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me is, there's a couple different ways. My website is ericwilsoncoaching.com. Obviously, you can fill out a form on there. My contact information's on there as well. I'm Eric Wilson Coaching on Instagram, so you can always DM me through Instagram. Those are probably the 2 best ways to get me. My cell phone is on Instagram as well, so you can either call me or DM me. But like I said, my passion is, I think so many physicians, plastic surgeons, and people who are running med spas that I specifically deal with have spent so long dreaming about what they're about to do, that my passion is giving them the tools to do it right, so that 10 years down the road, they're not looking back and going, this is miserable. Why did I do this? I want them, 10 years down the road to feel like they've made the right investment in their life and their future, and that they love the business that they're running.
Eric, it's as I said a moment ago, it's not often that I feel that discussion really that I have with somebody could impact me, because usually it's about the industry. But I got to tell you, I'm even thinking about hiring you to bring you into my team, to basically give you a little bodybuilding kind of vision. And anyway, great discussion. It's been great to meet you, and
enjoyed it a lot, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Everybody, I really suggest you reach out to Eric if you're struggling with any of these things, and on a minor basis or macro basis, suggest you connect with him and have you help you out. So Eric, thanks a bunch.
Thank you. All right. Good talking to you, Scott. Bye-bye.